Serra. He was born in Petra on the island of Majorca. He came as a theology professor and then eventually established missions in the central part of Mexico, and those missions exist to this day. They're beautiful missions in the area called Sierra Gorda. Then the call came to Father Serra to go north. Now there is a very interesting reason why Spain was concerned about what was called Alta California, because Spain was worried about what was coming from the north and what was coming from the east. The British were coming from the east and the Russians coming down from the north, where Alaska is today. And so they wanted to make sure that they got settlements to claim Alta California. But they also, because it was a very religious country, wanted to proclaim the gospel to the indigenous people in Alta California, and hence they sent Father Serra with a group of Father Franciscans to what is now known as California. And there 21 missions were established. Now, Father Serra did not establish all of those missions. Father Serra established 9 of those 21 missions himself. This mission, San Juan Capistrano, that I'm privileged to pastor, is the 7th mission that Father Serra himself established and founded on November 1st, 1776. Now, that was an important year, 1776, because there were some very exciting things happening in the east coast of North America at that time. But here on November 1st, a little mission was established. Now, it's interesting to note that 1 year prior, in 1775, some of the colleagues of Father Serra attempted to establish this mission. We think it was more inland, perhaps maybe 3 miles inland from this present site. And it was not successful. There was an Indian uprising in San Diego. The Padres were frightened, and so they buried the mission bell and they left the site. 1 year later, Father Serra, one can almost hear the exasperation in his voice, saying, well, you know, if you folks are not going to do this properly, I'm going to have to do it myself. So he came back on November 1st and established this mission. And within a year or two, the foundation stones of the oldest building that we have on this mission site, which is what we call the Serra Chapel, those foundation stones, the adobe, were laid for that chapel. We call it the Serra Chapel because we know that Father Serra himself celebrated Mass in that chapel. He baptized, and in fact, when I was installed on July 1st, 2003, as the pastor here, part of the installation ceremony was the handing over of the baptismal registry of this parish, which we keep in our archives. That baptismal registry, and it's done in calfskin and parchment, the first entry is in the hand of Father Serra, and he did the first baptism here, and he signed it himself. Now, why did they establish missions? Well, of course, 2 reasons why missions were established in California. One, perhaps a more virtuous reason, was because they wanted to share the Christian faith with the indigenous people of this land. There was also somewhat of an ulterior motive, and that was to make sure that this land could be claimed for Spain. And so near every mission there was a garrison or a presidio where the soldiers were. Now, in all candor, the system did not always work well. The Franciscans, who were very concerned about sharing the good news of the gospel, oftentimes were frustrated because the soldiers who were at the garrison and the presidio were not always as virtuous as they should be, and sometimes they abused the indigenous people, etc. So this created some historic tensions there. But in any case, a twofold motive why these missions were established. They thrived in the early years. This mission, the San Juan, was one of the richest of the missions because of the land holdings. They had cattle. They they had grapevines, they had tallow vats in which candles were made, which we needed for on the altar for Mass, wine for the celebration of Mass. Conversions were slow at the beginning, but then eventually the native people of this community, who were very peaceful, called we call them today the Juaneño, because of their connection to Mission San Juan. The natives who were connected to San Gabriel Mission were Gabrielinos. These indigenous people were very Pacific. They were bound to the ocean, they went fishing, and they were very receptive to the Christian message, and thousands upon thousands were baptized and brought into the faith. There was a certain protective character to the missions. They exercised a certain, I guess today one could call it, they were somewhat patronizing to the natives, but they were protecting them oftentimes from the soldiers in the Presidio. But the conversions were so great that in time, the small little chapel that Father Serra established shortly after his arrival could not accommodate the numbers that were coming to Mass. And so in 1798, foundation stones were laid for a great church. A church not made with adobe, clay, but that would be made with stone, that would be brought from the riverbeds nearby. And by the way, one of the reasons why this site was chosen by Father Serra for the mission is because there is water nearby, and the missions had to be near water. And the ocean, which is only less than 5 miles away, Dana Point today, but that was the natural harbor where the ships could come and bring supplies, etc. So, in 1798, foundation stones were laid for a great church. The indigenous people of this land, the Juaneños, were the ones that, by and large, built this church. It was an architect from New Spain, and in 1806 the church was completed. It was massive. It was the largest church west of the Mississippi when it was completed. Ships could see the domes of the church when they were coming around into the natural harbor of what we call Dana Point today. And the celebration inaugurating and dedicating that church was truly magnificent. Franciscans came from all over the missions to be here. That church tragically only lasted for 6 years. On December 8th, 1812, as some 40 indigenous people together with the priests were in the church celebrating morning Mass, there was a great earthquake. And the roof of the stone church caved in. 40 people died that day. They are buried in the sacred cemetery here at the mission. That stone church, after its collapse, was never able to be rebuilt. They relocated back to another area for daily worship. The mission continued to thrive, but obviously socio-political situations changed in New Spain. What with the Mexican Revolution and the expulsion of the Spanish government, Alta California then became under the governance of the Mexican government. They were not concerned about the evangelization efforts of Alta California as the Spaniards were. They certainly liked the land, and the Mexican governors who took over in Alta California seized that land, and they secularized the missions. They no longer were part of the government. There was a separation of church and state, which did not exist in the time in Spain.